Welcome to the Mama Village podcast, your go-to resource for all things pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. From positive and informative stories to expert advice, this platform is designed to help you feel informed and remove fear as you journey through motherhood. Join this community as we share stories that warm the heart and expert insights that inform the mind. I'm your host, Ellen. Before we delve into today's episode, the Mama Village would like to take a moment to acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of the land in which we gather, work and share these stories across many lands in Australia. The Mama Village recognises the traditional custodians of the land and recognises their enduring connection to this country and extends our respects to elders past, present and emerging. It is important to recognise that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women cultivated a profound connection between birthing and the land. For generations, these communities have woven birth stories into the fabric of their cultural identity, creating a tapestry of knowledge that transcends time. As we explore birth stories and education, we acknowledge the importance of preserving and revitalising traditional birthing culture, recognising the profound impact it has had on the understanding of birth as a sacred and deeply spiritual experience. Hi everyone and welcome to the Mama Village podcast. Today I have the honour of sitting down with Mel, who fearlessly embraces the power of home birth and free birth. Mel's story is nothing short of extraordinary. At 43 weeks gestation, she embarked on the profound journey of birthing her daughter, Alaska, at home, a testament to her unwavering trust in the birthing process and her own intuition. Through 68 hours of labour, Mel found herself navigating the ebb and flow of intensity, reflecting back on her first labour experience with newfound wisdom and clarity. In our conversation, Mel shares the profound importance of belief and support during labour, highlighting the pivotal role her midwife played in guiding her with reassurance and confidence. She reflects on the significance of her baby's prolonged descent, trusting that it was a necessary journey for her safe emergence into the world. But Mel's journey doesn't stop there. At 42.5 weeks gestation, she embarks on another remarkable journey of free birth, birthing her son Lakai with a profound sense of empowerment and autonomy. With laughter and smiles amidst her contractions, Mel surrenders to the rhythm of labour, finding solace and strength in the sacred journey of bringing new life into the world. Beyond her birthing experiences, Mel speaks passionately about her newfound advocacy for postpartum care and the nurturing of mothers. She emphasises the importance of partner support during the early days of motherhood, highlighting the transformative impact of having a loving and supportive presence by her side. So join us as we journey through Mel's extraordinary story of resilience, surrender, and the profound beauty of birthing on one's own terms. It's a conversation filled with wisdom, laughter, and a deep reverence for the miraculous journey of motherhood. Don't forget that if you like the show, please subscribe and leave a review on your podcast platform. Thank you all for your continuing support. Now let's get into today's episode. Welcome to the Mama Village, Mel.
Thank you for having me.
I am so excited to have you on. Can you please tell the listeners a bit about yourself, like your age, who is in your family, and where you're from?
Yeah, so obviously I'm Mel. I'm 25. I live with my husband Jesse and our two bubs. So I've got a 6-week-old Lakai who was born at home, and then I have a 2.5-year-old girl named Alaska who was also born at home. And we live just out of Newcastle in New South Wales.
Beautiful. And I love the names.
Thank you. Alaska gets Lasky. So most people know her by that. So yeah, Lasky and Lakai.
So beautiful. I'm a huge fan of unique names and I love Alaska. And I've never heard Lakai before. Does it have a special meaning?
So it's a common Indigenous name. So I'm a Worimi woman. And I think also it's got maybe Hawaiian origins, but I just really liked it. I found boys' names really hard and I'm the same. Any common names, I would associate it with somebody I knew and I was like, oh no, I can't name them that. So I'm a big lover of unique names.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, let's jump into your first pregnancy. So did you do anything to prepare to conceive?
No. So both of my pregnancies have been definitely a wanted, but a little bit of a surprise. So first time round, we had put into the universe, we knew we wanted kids really young. He's my husband now, but I've been with him since I was 14.
Wow.
Yeah. So we've been together a long time. And yeah, we always knew we wanted kids young. So we had spoken about it and we've traveled and done all that stuff. And we sort of put it out into the universe and we did try, like nothing too intensive, like we didn't get ovulation tests or anything. And then when it wasn't happening, we sort of just like let it go. And then at a really interesting point of our life, I was relocating to Queensland. I was leaving all my family and we were looking at moving to the Sunshine Coast and I found out I was pregnant. So we obviously didn't go through with that plan, but it was just the universe was like, oh no, like you're meant to stay here. This is what your journey is now.
Wow. So did you end up making the move to the Sunshine Coast while you were pregnant?
No. So I actually, when I found out, we were looking at houses up there and then COVID happened and we got a house the day the borders closed. And it was just so many signs were saying it's not your time right now. Or, yeah, you need to stay put. So we are still in New South Wales and we actually have built I built a really beautiful community here. So I'm super happy that we're still here.
Oh, beautiful. Well, definitely meant to be.
Yes.
So then how were you feeling physically and emotionally throughout your pregnancy?
At the time, I thought I had a really great pregnancy. And now looking back, my lifestyle was so different. I was working full time. I was in child protection, in management. I was on call and I had a really stressful job. And I was sore. I had sciatica. I was really sick. I was vomiting until the late 20s. And I thought that was all normal. Everyone sort of normalizes that's how you're meant to feel. And then it wasn't until I've had my second pregnancy where I didn't have any of that. I thought, wow, that was a really tough pregnancy. I didn't have any complications as such, just those pregnancy symptoms. And I just didn't feel great in my body, had a lot of stress and just working long hours. I wasn't eating well, wasn't on my feet all day. I was at a desk job. So probably wasn't the best pregnancy, but like I said, I had no complications.
So then what was your perception of birth before you fell pregnant?
Yeah, so I was quite young, so I didn't know anyone in my friend circle that had babies, but I knew my mum had always spoken about birth like it was normal and she had vaginal births, natural births. She had intervention, but she had all vaginal births and she breastfed all her babies. So that's what I grew up around. And then my sister-in-law had birth 2 years before me in our local birth centre. We've got a midwifery group practice here, which I'm very grateful that we have access to that. So she birthed at the birth centre and she raved about that. Pretty much there's no pain relief options. So I just thought that if I ever fell pregnant, that's the same path I would go down. And then I hadn't really heard of any traumatic birth stories, to be honest, until I actually dove into the world of birth and found out why people were veering away from the mainstream. Like I hadn't actually grown up around that or been exposed to much of that.
So how did you come across it in the first place? Was it you just started doing your own research about birth or you read a book? What was that process like?
Yeah, so it was a bit of a synchronicity. And I think so many things happen in your life that nudge you towards this journey you're meant to take. So my sister, very early on, she was presenting at a local pregnancy seminar and it was a holistic pregnancy seminar. And she brought me a ticket. I think I was like 8 weeks pregnant. And they just had some doulas and they had a private midwife that did a presentation on what home birth is. And it was just 2 minutes in, she just started with sharing photos of women that had births with her. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this is what I'm meant to do. I was like, why haven't I thought of this? And she actually started her presentation with, yes, home birth is legal. And I actually thought about that. I was like, I have never heard of anyone home birthing except for back years and years ago. Like I didn't even think that was an option. Even though my local midwifery group practice actually offered that at that time, I didn't even know about that. So yeah, it was just I needed to be there at that time and I pursued that with her and she ended up being my midwife.
Wow, what a beautiful story.
Yeah, so very lucky that I was put in that position on that day.
Yeah, another sign from the universe.
Yes.
So what was your model of care?
Yeah, so I had a private midwife for my first bud, which was amazing because I had all of, she was 2021, so it was like peak COVID lockdowns and things were getting a bit crazy in the hospital system. So I had all my prenatal appointments at home. I never had to leave my home. And that included birth support with 2 midwives. Her package also included hypnobirthing, which was really great as a first-time mum. And I think more so like for husbands or partners as well. I thought that was really good. And then 6 weeks of postnatal care, and that was my normal. So it wasn't until I've spoken to other friends who birthed in the hospital system where they didn't even have their own midwife. I was like, oh wow, that's not what everyone gets. I was actually really shocked that that's not, the normal for everyone.
Yeah, it's amazing the difference between the care that you get through the hospital and the care that you get through having a private midwife or a doula. It's just like, especially I think with postpartum support, I think the
Yeah,
difference there is just huge.
I agree.
So then what did you do to prepare both physically and mentally for your birth?
Yeah, I did I become a birth nerd. So I really dove into this like world of birth. And I just remember listening. I was driving like 50 minutes to work each day, like each way. And I would just listen to Positive Birth Australia. I'd listen to every birth story I could. And by the time I was, at the end of my pregnancy, I had listened to the whole spectrum of birth. I'd listened to quick labors. I'd listened to long labors. I'd listened to, meconium stained waters. I'd listened to all these potential situations that it was really good to hear first-hand experiences. I also did hypnobirthing, as I mentioned. By the time I did that, I sort of felt like I knew that stuff anyway. But I think as a first-time mum, I did find that really helpful. And I don't think I really read much in that first pregnancy. It was just a lot of podcasts, like a lot of birth stories. Physically, I was working, like I said, a desk job. I wasn't very physically fit. And I went on a retreat to the Blue Mountains at maybe 34 weeks pregnant. And I was umming and ahhing if I was going to go hiking with the group I was with for the day. And we all pulled a tarot card. And I pulled this card that literally said movement. And I was like, okay, well, that's my answer. And from that point in my pregnancy, I made it my goal to move every day, and I felt so much better. And I was doing a lot of swimming at night. Even if I didn't feel like doing laps, I would just go to the pool and squat and do lunges in the shallow, and it felt so good. I just felt every night when I would leave, my pelvis would be open, and I just felt like really prepared for birth. So it's a really good option for people that if they're having pelvic pain or something, if they're not able to do very physical stuff, swimming I find is a really good medium.
Yeah, what a great suggestion. I absolutely love that because it just lifts your belly in the sense that you feel that weightless feeling, right?
Yeah. And I just felt like everything was really open and flowing every time I'd leave the pool. I'd feel like, oh, tonight's going to be the night. I feel like really prepared. It wasn't. I went for many weeks after that, but mentally I felt good. So
Yeah. And then I guess let's jump straight into your birth story. So, how are
sure.
you feeling towards the end of your pregnancy and how many weeks were you when labor started?
Yeah, so I seen something from B from 4 and 4 store, and it was like, prepare to be pregnant for 42 weeks. And everyone at work was saying, oh, you should probably hand your clients over and at 30 weeks. And I was like, oh, I'm going to be that lady that's pregnant until they're 43 weeks. And I'd make this big joke out of it. And I literally had my daughter at 43 weeks pregnant. So
Wow.
I just dove into birth and I looked at everything I could, and I've seen so many times, like, don't focus on your due date and prepare to be pregnant. So I was really prepared for that. So 42 weeks came around and my midwife never once mentioned my dates or anything like that. That wasn't even a discussion around the end of my pregnancy. So that last week, I felt really good. I had a bit of trouble sleeping. That was a bit frustrating, but yeah, I just felt normal. I didn't have any concerns. And I think it was maybe 42 and 4. Yeah, 42 and 4. I woke up in the morning at like 3 a.m., that classic 3 a.m. niggle that a lot of women get. And I started feeling really crampy and I couldn't get back to sleep. I was so excited. Like as a first time mum, I was like, this is it. And you hear like, oh, go back to bed and get rest. And I just couldn't.
Especially at 42 and 4, I imagine you were just like,
Yeah. My husband, I sent him to work for the day because I was like, I just want to continue with my day as normal. And I went to an acupuncture appointment that I had booked in. And once I was actually at the appointment and sitting down, like still for the hour, I was like, something's actually happening. By that night, about 6 p.m., I started getting like contractions, proper ones where I was getting irritated and I couldn't really talk through them. And about 10 p.m. that night, I started getting my first wave of intensity of labor. And I was having a contraction, vomiting, and then having to sit on the toilet. And I got stuck in that exact cycle for maybe 4 hours. And I remember like at one point saying to my husband, I don't know how long I can do this. This is so rough. And I remember just looking at his face. He was like, you probably got a lot longer to go. And it wasn't like the contractions. It was just that cycle, like the vomiting, and my body was just clearing out, obviously. But after that stopped, about halfway through the night, I just put my headphones on, got on the birth ball, and just wrote it out. And I really loved, in both of my labors, I've loved laboring on my own, like fully within, just getting into the music and just like really surrendering to it. I was prepared as the sun came up that it could taper down, and that exact thing happened. Pretty much as soon as the sun started rising, they were just getting slower and like more spaced apart. And yeah, I was feeling fine that day. I just had them maybe every 5 to 10 minutes apart. I couldn't sleep. I tried to go back to sleep, and I remember getting like a contraction laying down, and I was like, no way, like I cannot ever do that again. That was awful.
So was this nearing, because I think you said your first contraction was about 3 o'clock in the morning the night before. So is this nearing like 36 hours-ish?
So I woke up on the Wednesday at 3 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is going into Thursday night.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. And then 11 p.m. on the Friday night is when Bob actually came.
Wow.
But yeah, I went into my second night of labor, which was really intense. And same thing, pretty much as soon as it got dark, it was like on. And I was sure that I was so close to meeting my baby. And I just went around the house in like circuits. So I would like be leaning over. I didn't fill up the birth pool, but I would just like lean over on the birth ball and like lean over the back of my lounge, go to like sit on the toilet. And each circuit or each station, as soon as I would get like to the point where I couldn't do any more, I'd move to another environment. So I rode that out the Thursday night as well. That was a really intense night. Like I just remember being like, holy moly, this is labor. And then the Friday morning came around and the sun came up. And when the sun came up, I just felt like all that confidence and everything that I had just went down. I was like, wow, I was prepared for like a, 2-day labor, but this is like going on to day 3 and this is a lot. And I think the difference was just the no sleep. Was by the Friday morning, my body, I'd never been up for 2 nights. Like I'd never experienced that. So my body was actually like, I felt like it was shutting down. I didn't mention, that obviously I kept in touch with my midwife the whole time. And I was really like wanting to do everything I could on my own and like use all the resources I had internally. And then when I felt like I couldn't do any more, then like call for support. So she was happy to come at any time. And I think on the Friday morning, I just hit this wall and I ended up jumping on Google and like scaring myself, and like the hormones of my labor at that point would have just been going like down. Like I did everything they tell you not to do when you're in labor, and I started getting that fear into me. And I just remember my contractions just pretty much stopped. Like they were like 15 minutes apart. And I got to the point I was like wanting them to be really intense, but they weren't. So I called my midwife, and my second midwife came over, and she was actually the one that done my hypnobirthing with me. So she said, today we're just going to relax. Like we're just going to get you in the pool. Let's do hypnobirthing meditations. Let's calm you down. Let's ground you. So I spent the day just in the pool with her, and it was so funny. Like people were like, how did you do that? Like how did you do that many nights, and time just wasn't a thing. It was really, really like weird. It was just like as soon as my husband would go to bed, it would feel like it would be a couple of hours and the sun was coming up. It's like this labor vortex. So I just spent all the day in the pool with her. And then that afternoon, my midwife came around. So this is a Friday afternoon. And she walked in and she started listening to me. And she just checked Bub's heart rate and things like that. And she just said, "You're having a baby by the morning. Like, your baby's coming. Like, you're okay. You're safe. You're going to have a baby by tomorrow morning." And I was like, "What?" And it was just this thing that switched in my brain, and then I was ready to go again. Like, I was so excited and I was ready to go, and that's all I needed to hear. And I always reflect. I love sharing this story because quite often you hear, especially first-time mums, when they have like labor dystocia or like not progressing and they end up with cesareans. And I know that if I was in a different environment, that conversation wouldn't have occurred. It would have been like, "You're needing to go to theatre now." So I just needed someone that believed in me and could say that you're safe and everything's okay. And she said, "I'm just going to let you rest. Like, we're going to go, we're going to let you rest. We're going to let you get prepared for tonight." And I think they left 10 minutes after they'd left. I was like, "Oh my God, I need to get in the pool." And I just had this like huge wave of intensity and I went straight into transition. And my contractions went from like, they were building up. Now looking back on it, she could hear me vocalizing, so she knew that I was actually getting close. But I just went from what felt like nothing, like 0 to 100 really quick. And I had a July baby, so it was winter and the pool had been filled up during the day and it was freezing cold, but I was just like, I had to get in. I just got straight in and I was like, my husband was having a sleep and I was like, "Fill the birth pool out." Like, I just screamed at him and he was like, now. And I'm like, "Yes, now." And we had run out of hot water, which was amazing.
Oh.
So he was on the stove boiling soup pots and I was just in the cold water. I just couldn't, and I didn't even feel it, to be honest. Like, I was so in labor zone that I just didn't feel it. He called my midwives back and at this point I was like roaring in the pool. I didn't know my body could actually make those sounds. And I feel like he was probably a bit shocked as well. And I was feeling mentally good, but I remember my body, it was like shock. Like, my body was just shaking, like intense shaking. And I actually felt like I was dying. And I thought that was just birth. I thought that was just what the transition you go through. But now that I've had experienced my second birth, I was like, oh wow, that was so different. I didn't feel in control and I didn't know what to expect. And I didn't know that feeling of when you're feeling like it's so intense means you're actually about to meet your baby. I didn't know that. And I thought that I could potentially be going through this stage for another 24 hours. So like, I was in the thick of it. My second midwife got there first and I was feeling for a long time like I couldn't do it. And I kept thinking, oh my God, I just need to get an ambulance and go to hospital. And then I would think, I couldn't sit on a bed. Like, I couldn't transfer. I couldn't get out of this pool. So I just have to. And I was just going on this ping pong in my brain around like, I was not logical, but I was trying to be logical. And I said to her once, I don't know if I can do this. And she said, "You're doing it." And then it was like a minute after that, I felt the pressure change from the front to my back. And I felt like I needed to poo. And I was like, oh, I felt like this bowling ball feeling. And she was like, "You're here, you've done it." And it was the biggest relief I've ever experienced. I loved this stage. In this labor, I loved the stage of pushing. And I just could finally sit down. Like, I wasn't able to lay down or sit down in my labor, but I could finally like sit down in the pool and I could have something to eat. I didn't mention that either. I couldn't sleep and I couldn't eat anything. I was so like nauseous the whole time. And then I finally could get something into me. So my husband was just like feeding me food and bliss balls and just something to get me like prepped up again. It was quite a long process of like, I didn't get fetal ejection reflex or anything, but when I was getting the contractions, I was like, do I push? And like, I didn't really know what to expect. So I think I was just so excited at this point. When I was getting contractions, I was just pushing. I didn't have like this like full body reflex of just like the baby coming out. My main midwife got there and she actually filmed and sent me the video, and she was only there for 8 minutes before Bub had actually fully come out. And yeah, I just remember like pushing and then finally feeling hair and feeling the head, and then the head coming out, and I was like, do I like pull them? And my midwife was like, no, like they're going to rotate and then their shoulders are going to come out. And then, yeah, with the next contraction, Bub's shoulders come out and they just sort of flew out into the water. And I did go to pick her up, but she had the cord around her neck twice. And then she was like wearing her cord like a backpack. It was crisscrossed across her back and over her shoulders. It was so funny. There was no like chaos, or like my husband just picked her up as well and started unwrapping her. And then I brought her to my chest, and it was just like the most incredible feeling. I think like, I don't know if it was just your first birth, but that's like what you've dreamed of, that moment. And I just can't ever explain that feeling. And it was just like me crying, my husband crying, my midwife crying. It was just really beautiful. And she was perfect. I always think back on my labor, and I'm a big believer of like babies come the way that's safest for them, whether it be breech or whether it be a long labor or fast labor. And I think maybe like with her cord, the way she was so tangled, maybe she just needed a bit longer to descend, and that's what was safest for her. But yeah, that was my first birth in a nutshell.
What a beautiful story. I think at least 3 times I had goosebumps all up my arm.
Oh, I'm glad.
Yeah. And I don't know if I've interviewed someone before with such a long labor. I imagine mentally and physically that just would have felt like so much. And can you talk to that a little bit, in the sense of how did you keep your mind so strong over such a
Yeah.
long period of time?
Yeah, I'm an Aries, so I'm a fire sign, and I'm like, if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it. And I know it shouldn't feel like this, but I always actually speak to a lot of women and they're like, oh, I'm just worried that like, what if I need a transfer? And I've already told people I'm going to birth this way, and what if it doesn't occur? And I had that thought as well. I was like, well, I've already said to everyone I'm home birthing, and everyone was sort of on board with it, but my mum was like, oh, good luck with that, and had a bit of a laugh. And I was like, well, I'm going to prove you wrong. So when the thoughts come up, I was like, no, I'm doing this. Like, I've invested this money. This is what I can do. Like, and like, this is the initiation that I need to go through to become a mum. I didn't know until after, but I remember like, I think my husband asked my midwife, oh, like usually do women transfer? And she was like, yeah, after 24 hours, most women tap out. And I didn't know that. I just thought that, yeah, that's just what I needed to go through to get to the end result. So I'm really glad that I did, because it taught me so much, and just like my confidence in myself was just after that, like incredible. Like any situation I would face, I'd be like, well, I just went through that unmedicated. Your mental strength is really, yeah. I just believed in myself, I think, after that.
You must have been on such a high.
Yeah.
Such a massive high.
Yeah. I did literally, after I asked to get out of the pool, I sat on my lounge with Bub and I just fell asleep.
I bet. I probably would have passed out for a week.
Yeah, I was very tired, very, very tired.
Yeah. So let's talk about the birth of your placenta. So can you speak to how that all unfolded?
Yeah, so I moved over to my couch. I didn't stay in the pool for very long because it got cold. So I moved over to my couch and I just like cuddled Babe, and we were all on this big high, and I started breastfeeding and literally just fell asleep, and my husband just held the baby like up under my breast. And then maybe like an hour and a half after birth, my midwife was like, oh, like we're going to start thinking about the placenta now. And I was like, oh, and I hadn't really thought about the placenta. And it's so funny. They say like, keep the conditions like as like you do with birth, like the birth's not over until the placenta's here. I didn't know that at that point. I just thought it would just happen. And I started not getting fearful, but after that I was like, oh, I don't want to have to push this out. Or I had no, even though I was like skin to skin and breastfeeding, I had no urge for it to release. And yeah, I ended up sort of trying to push. Can't really remember now. I think it was maybe 2.5 hours after birth, and I like pushed it out. And I remember being like, oh, I hated that process. First time I really didn't like it. And yeah, then I ended up getting it encapsulated.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So how did you hear about placenta encapsulation?
Probably on like one of the podcasts I'd listened to. I can't really remember, but I knew.
Oh, yeah, of course, because Positive Birth Australia talks about placenta encapsulation a lot.
Yeah, I think most of the stories I'd heard they got it encapsulated. So that's what I did the first time.
Yeah, nice. And I know you didn't have another experience to compare it to at that time, but do you feel like it made a difference for you?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, like you said, you don't have another experience, but I didn't get like baby blues, or my energy was really quite good. Yeah, I felt like my hormones or my emotions and stuff, I didn't experience like that day 3, emotional overload or anything like that. So for me at the time, I think it worked fine.
Oh, beautiful. Well, let's talk about your postpartum experience. So did you do anything to prepare for postpartum?
Not at all. So I was like biggest birth nerd ever.
And that's why I'm laughing, is because you've obviously done so much research on birth. Yeah.
Learn everything I could about birth. And now that I'm thinking about it, not many podcasts ask about postpartum. People share their birth story and they don't ask this question. So I really hadn't heard much about postpartum. And I didn't do anything. I didn't have meals lined up. I just expected that this baby would come and we would just continue on with our lives and have visitors. And I really didn't, consider anything else. And a week after baby come in, we went into like hard lockdown where you couldn't like have anyone over and you couldn't like go out apart from like shopping or exercise, which was actually nice. Looking back, like we didn't have to have conversations with people around like we're not ready for visitors or anything, because they were legally kept out anyway. But no, I did not do anything to prepare.
Wow. So then how was the overall postpartum experience? Because like you said, it was sort of a blessing that you had visitors locked out. But at the same time, I imagine that must have been difficult if you didn't prepare.
Yeah, so more just the meals. Like now I am so passionate about postpartum, and obviously you'll hear my second experience, but women need nourishing after birth, and not to be heading out at 9 p.m. because there's nothing in the house and getting takeaway. Like that's what we ended up doing. And I just remember I had the newborn blur my first time around. Like we couldn't really get meals prepared. We were both struggling to shower. It just felt like this like really intense period. And we were like getting out of the house for the day at like 9 p.m. Yeah, it was more just I didn't get that rest and nourishment that I now know is so important for new mums. And yeah, it was good. I didn't ever have like postpartum depression or think I like felt like unsupported. Both of my postpartums, my husband's had 2 months off with annual leave. So first time around, he had a mixture of like annual leave and unpaid time. And because I had been working full time, it was a lot easier then. So he took a bit of unpaid time, which is like, I think the key to both of my postpartum experiences is having him home. I even remember him going back to work after the 8 weeks, and I was like, oh, wow. Like, I was actually scared. And I remember thinking, how do women do this after 2? Like, I couldn't fathom that. So I felt really grateful that I had that opportunity, I suppose.
It's making me reflect a lot on my experience as well. My husband went back after 2 weeks after my first, and I remember it being hell. It was absolute
Yeah.
hell. And then when we fell pregnant the second time, I thought, I'm not doing that again. We're saving up, and you're taking at least a month. I think because my second baby was born over the Christmas period, he ended up having about 6 weeks off. But yeah, I was like, I'm not doing that again.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's jump into your second pregnancy. So did you do anything
Sure.
differently to prepare to conceive?
No, I was that person. I think my daughter was like nearly 2. Yeah, maybe like not 2. Yeah, she wasn't 2 yet. And I was like experiencing the full blown, she's a fire sign as well. She's a Leo and she is a very adventurous, wild, like we call, like I say, I do free range parenting, and God, then she become a toddler and I was like, oh wow, these free range kids are pretty wild. I was joking to all my friends like, oh, I could not have another one right now. Like I didn't know at the time I was already pregnant.
Oh,
But I was like, oh, I can't even deal with this one. Like imagine having a baby and being pregnant, and could not do it. And I didn't actually add in my first pregnancy and my second pregnancy, before I actually found out, I thought I was having a mental breakdown. So to the point with my first pregnancy, I had gone to see someone thinking I was losing the plot. And like just that just must be my hormones in early pregnancy. They're wild. So this time around, I remember actually calling my husband at work, and I'm not like this. I'm so independent. Not saying you have to be, but I'm like, for me personally, like I find it really hard to ask for help. And I remember calling my husband at work one night and being like, I am going to lose it. Like I'm not coping. And it was more the mum guilt around like if I would react a way that didn't align with how I wanted to parent my daughter, I'd feel so guilty. And I remember this night just being like, I just keep like raising my voice at her and getting frustrated. And I was like, I think you need to come home. And I think I found out like 2 days later that I was pregnant. So that all made sense. And then when I told my friends, they were like, oh, you were just saying that you couldn't have another one. And I was like, I know. Yes, here we are. But such a welcome surprise. Like I was so excited. And now I'm like, oh, it's a perfect age gap. She's 2.5 and I've found it, really beautiful, that age gap so far.
Oh, that's so nice. And so then how are you feeling physically and emotionally throughout your pregnancy?
Amazing. So this point in time, I was a stay-at-home mum. So I was just staying at home with my daughter, and we're very adventurous. So like we're out most of the day and doing a lot of walking, and like you're chasing after a toddler, you're always on your feet. I felt so good. Body felt amazing. I had like a little bit of nausea at the start, maybe like weeks 8 and 9, and I just had to eat something, like make sure I was eating. Had no vomiting. It was just a polar opposite experience, which was beautiful. It was like enjoyable.
Yeah. So did you do
So
anything
different.
differently? Like were you in a different place? It's just a different pregnancy.
Different pregnancy. My diet would have been so much better.
Okay.
And like, there's no one knows what's behind morning sickness. Like some things that work for some people might not, but I think I was just in such a different place. But then again, I might have another baby and have the same experience being sick. I felt really lucky. It was a really enjoyable pregnancy.
Oh, that's beautiful. I've heard a lot of birth stories. I've interviewed a lot of people, and I haven't yet heard such a different pregnancy experience. Like it's normally the other way around, where you
Yeah.
might have a blissful pregnancy for your first and the second one's a bit harder. I don't think I've ever heard of it roles reversed. And that's why I'm really curious to know, was your diet different? All those sorts of things. But like you said, there's no explanation behind what causes morning sickness. So we just don't know.
No. Yeah. I think also, like people say, and I'm not saying pregnancy with a toddler isn't hard, like everyone's experience is different, but working full time while you're pregnant is hard. Like you can't I wasn't like nearly an hour away from home, and I had such a stressful job that I knew if I left early, the next day would just be chaos. So like I didn't have boundaries with my work at that point. And like when you're working full time, you can't just lay on the lounge. Like even with my toddler, if I really needed to, I could just put a movie on and lay down with her. You can't do that when you're working. And I think even I always reflect on like those early weeks when, you're told not to tell anyone, or when you're really sick. That's sort of when women need leave from work. Like especially women that have really intense morning sickness. It's like you're just expected to carry on. So yeah, I give it to anyone that's going through pregnancy, but like especially working full time, it's tough. And a lot of people don't recognize that, I don't think, especially like employers and stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing how society sets us up these days to really have those high expectations of being able to work full time and be pregnant as well. It is full on. Look, certainly there's aspects or times throughout your pregnancy where you would be able to work full time, but particularly in those early days, like you spoke about, or if you've got severe morning sickness or you've got sciatica, you had that in your previous
Mm,
pregnancy, all those sorts of things. Like, it's just wild that we're not afforded leave or support for that anymore. And I don't know
yeah.
how women do it, particularly women that have like hyperemesis or HG. I just don't know how they do it.
Yeah, I agree. It's debilitating.
Yeah. So, what was your model of care this time around?
So this time around, my first midwife was one of the unicorns that really truly supported women in their choices, which unfortunately in our maternity system, it's not set up, especially for private midwives are fantastic. I'm never dissing private midwives, but they have guidelines as well that they need to follow, and they can be restricted by them. So unfortunately, my midwife was not able to practice at that time. And when I fell pregnant and I looked at the available options in my area, which was now huge, there's so many private midwives available post COVID, I just didn't feel fully aligned with anyone. Like I knew exactly how I wanted to birth and choices I wanted to make in my pregnancy, and I didn't feel like there was anyone that would actually support that or that I would want in my space. And I also had this like innate like calling to just not see anyone, like not have a GP and not have a midwife. And I sat with that for quite a few weeks. And I remember saying to my husband, like, I think I just want to have a birth keeper or a doula. And we just put that sort of out into the universe, and I sat with that for a little bit. And then I said, yeah, I think I want to just birth with a birth keeper. I knew I wanted someone there to hold space, and it's so good to have an extra set of hands. At the time I was like, I want someone there to support me emotionally, because I knew how rough transition was the first time, and I was not fearful of that, but I really loved having a female in my space. So yeah, we discussed that, and I seeked out a birth keeper, and we ended up just free birthing with the support of a birth keeper this time.
I'm so excited to talk about it and get into it. So, you've spoken a little bit about what motivated your decision to have a free birth. Did you have
Yeah.
any fears come up while you were sitting with that sort of thought in your mind?
So funny, like I think any pregnancy is a journey, but like the pregnancy, like a wild pregnancy and a free birth journey is like the inner work that I did. Just even in that 9 to 10 months, I was like a whole new person. So at the start, I was like, I definitely want someone there for this and this. And one of my non-negotiables, like I'm a very big believer in like knowledge is the antidote to fear. And I think anyone going through that is we had to sit with like, what if something happened to our baby, or what if our baby came out not breathing? And so we spoke about that, and we were happy with our decision that we would have to take that responsibility on. And one of my non-negotiables was to learn newborn resuscitation. So at the start, that's what I did. Or actually at the end of my pregnancy, we both become confident in that. And my fear, I suppose, would have been like if something had happened to our baby. And to overcome that, I just learnt the resuscitation. Me and my husband both knew it, and we were, by the end, I had no fears. Like, I was so set that that's how we were meant to birth. And I suppose I wasn't set on like everything's going to go fine and nothing's going to happen, but I had such a trust in my body that I knew I would know how to navigate a situation. I would trusted my body if it was telling me, or my baby was telling me that I needed support or I needed to transfer, that's what we had to do. But yeah, towards the end, no fears at all going into my birth.
And I think that's really important to talk about. And I'm glad that you have. There's this perception out there that when you choose a free birth, that you're not open to something going wrong, and that you're a bit blind to that, and you're not even considering going to a hospital or transferring if you felt like something was wrong. And every single woman that I speak to or hear their story, it's so opposite to that.
Yeah.
There's this amazing responsibility that these women and yourself are taking on to really trust, like you said, in your body. And if something goes wrong, you're taking responsibility then
Mm.
to take the necessary steps in your action plan, whatever that might be.
Yeah. And I think like one of the discussions we had is around like, unfortunately, we know that babies can die anywhere. Like we know that you can be in a obstetric care model, you can have the best midwives, the best OB, the best support, the best, health, and babies can die. It's more often that we would like than we'd like, but we had that discussion. And also like, people can go into the hospital system blind thinking that like nothing can go wrong, but we know the reality is it can wherever you birth. So that was something that we had to process, I suppose.
Yeah, and on that, you're saying we a lot. So was your partner supportive of your decision of free birth?
Yeah, he's like amazing. I'm quite like alternate in many aspects of my life, but I remember he had a discussion with his brother at the end of my pregnancy. And it was the first time we told his family like what our model of care was, like that we're just birthing at home without a midwife. And his brother was like, "Aren't you scared?" And like he was like really not happy. And he was saying to my husband, "You're scared, aren't you?" And he was like, "No, I just trust Mel. Like I know she's so educated." He was like, "I just know that whatever decision she's made, I trust that." And I always think about that and I think, oh, that's such a great response.
What a
and I'm
man.
so grateful. Yeah. Yeah. He's a huge, during my first pregnancy, he became a huge birth advocate, but now he's like, and I think he hears, the side that a lot of his friends or work colleagues, their wives have had really traumatic births with the best care teams around. Like, so he sees that other side. But yeah, I'm really grateful. He's great.
Oh, that's so nice. And so you did then tell your friends and family about your choice to free birth?
Yeah, so like my friends and family are all quite aligned, and some of my friends are all in the birth space as well. So yeah, I told all of them. I remember like I was quite brief with my family. Like I just said I'm just birthing at home, and then if they asked further questions, I answered that. But I remember my mum calling me like halfway through my pregnancy, and she said, "You're not having a midwife, are you?" And I said, "No." And she was like, "Okay." And that was all she ever said. Like she didn't mention one other thing. Yeah, I didn't tell my husband's family. He told his brother at the end, but they have like a lot of fear around birth due to their like own birth experiences. So we just like wanted to protect our space a little bit. We didn't share that with them, but yeah, most people in my life I did.
Wow, I think that's incredibly brave just because of the society that we live in. Like,
Yeah.
and I really think it's amazing that you are open about it as much as you can while still protecting your space, because then it opens up other people's minds to the idea of home birthing or free birthing, or even just having that innate trust in your ability to birth.
Yeah.
And I love that you're opening up those conversations. I think that's really great and brave of you.
Oh, thank you. It's been really interesting with my mum. Like I remember my exact conversation with her first time round where I said, "I'm going to birth at home and I'm going to like be in a birth pool and it's going to be dark and I'm going to have like fairy lights." And she laughed and said, "Good luck with that." And she was shaking her head. And to now, like in my second pregnancy, to come around to be fully open to whatever I decide. And I think it's back to that. She just trusted that I knew what was best for me. And now she's such an advocate for birth as well. It's so funny, her
Oh,
journey.
that's so nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like the power of storytelling, just sharing, one story can trickle down to so many people. And it's, yeah, I went to a mum meetup the other day and there was so many home birthing mums. It was just like it wasn't a birth meetup at all. And one of the girls said, "Oh yeah, like I chose to home birth after hearing your first story. And then one of the other girls said, well, I'm home birthing because I heard your story. And it's so funny because it just trickles down to so many people.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
So I just want to backtrack a little bit. You mentioned that you had a wild pregnancy. Can you please explain to the listeners what that is and what that meant for you?
Yeah. So I'll preface this with saying at no point was I against medical care. I just really tuned into my body, and like first pregnancy, I went straight to a GP. I had like a 6-week scan or something ridiculous. Like I got, I think 4 scans in my first pregnancy. When I fell pregnant the second time, I was like, I just had no feeling to do that. I had no push to do that. If I felt like I wanted to go see someone or get bloods, I would have, but I just never did. And I was like, is this just my body? Is this my intuition? Like, is this what I need to follow? And I did. And I always thought, sorry, I should say, a wild pregnancy, in my perspective, is like someone that doesn't seek any medical care throughout their pregnancy, whether that be like seeing a GP or getting scans. I did take a pregnancy test, but I didn't get bloods or anything. I did always say like, oh, around 30 weeks I'll get bloods. And then that time came around and I just didn't feel like I needed to. I felt really great in my body. And what that created was like this insane trust. Like I said, it's really a journey in this pregnancy to a free birth. It just, that over that 9 to 10 months, you have no option but to tune into your baby. And the differences were insane. Like I felt movements at 12 weeks or earlier. I knew my baby's position from like 17 weeks or maybe like 20 weeks. I started like trying to learn belly mapping. And then towards the end of my pregnancy, I knew what position my baby was in all day. I knew what they were doing. It's like I knew their routine. Like it was so insane. Where like my first pregnancy, I would have had no idea. Like I just waited for my midwife to come for our appointments and her to tell me baby's head's here and like this is their bum or whatever. And all the way through to my birth, I knew what my baby was doing the whole time. Just that, yeah, I built that innate trust in my baby and my body, which was so cool.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
So how did you prepare for your free birth? Did you rely on any additional resources like podcasts, books, communities? What did you do to prepare?
Yeah, I actually like sort of did the opposite where I was like, I'm going to strip down everything I know about birth. And I was like, I just want to learn the physiology of birth. Like I want to learn what our bodies are designed to do and like the science behind it and how it actually works. So I found I more gravitated towards like Dr. Rachel Reed's work and Dr. Sarah Wickham. And I think the great thing about birth is like when you speak about home birth is people think you're like this wacko that is uneducated or like, but a lot of the women in the birth space are highly educated with PhDs and they advocate and they challenge practices because they know the statistics and they know the evidence behind it. And with like, yeah, I felt really privileged to be able to read some of this work, and I love Dr. Sarah Wickham's stuff. Like she obviously challenges some of the really big topics, and I just read her stuff and be like, wow, it's insane that we've got all this evidence, yet it's what we're seeing in the maternity system isn't evidence-based practice. But yeah, I really just looked into even little things like Dr. Sarah Buckley talks about how labor is initiated. And it's when your baby's lungs are developed, they've found 2 hormones that are secreted out that attach to receptors in your uterus and put you into labor. And just that process, I found like nature's not flawed. Our body knows exactly what it needs to do. So I really tuned into probably the boring stuff that I like loved. I loved reading that. I did find myself the opposite to my first pregnancy, tuning out other people's birth stories, even free birth stories. I suppose I didn't want to get ideas around like, oh, second time around it can be quicker, or like I just really wanted to go back to basics and learn what my body was doing in that process. So yeah, that's really what I did. I did also listen to Birthing Instincts, which is actually run by, it's an American podcast. I'm not sure if you're aware of it. But
yeah.
it's like Dr. Stu, he's an OB, and there's a midwife that are both challenging the system as well. And I would just search, like, if there was like topics I was sort of interested in learning how they manage, or what the evidence was, I'd tune into that. So I listened to like stuff on meconium, and more so like if there was something that popped up in my birth, I'd actually know the data to make an informed choice. So yeah, I listened to Birthing Instincts a lot, and that was really it. I didn't do any other like birth education in terms of hypnobirthing or anything like that. Towards the end of my pregnancy, it was really interesting. I started thinking, like I'll just go over the breathing exercises. And then I had, again, this like feeling in my body that was like, no, I don't want to do that. And I had to sit with that as well, because I was like, am I going to go into labor and be like, I forget how to breathe? Like, what if I haven't trained my body in how to breathe? And I just trusted that wisdom that was coming through. And I went into labor, and surprise, my body just breathed, and I just breathed my baby out, and I did not think about having to count how many breaths. I wasn't in my head at all, which was such a cool experience.
Oh, that's amazing. And so you mentioned as well that you had a doula, is that right?
Yeah, so she has practiced for quite a few years as a doula, and most recently now sort of works like as a birth keeper, mainly away from the hospital environment. So yeah, she supported me prenatally and during my birth, and I also have had postpartum sessions with her.
Oh, amazing. Well, let's jump into your birth story. So how are you feeling towards the end of your pregnancy?
I was, again, in my head around like, I'll probably go to 42 weeks. I was like, I was curious to know if my first gestation was because dates were off, or if like I just gestate longer. And what I found out is I just gestate longer. So I was 42 and 5 when I went into labor, and both of my pregnancies I've never had pre-labor symptoms. Like I have had like a month of those like really low cramps and pelvic sort of sensations, but I've never had like, oh, this is going to happen. Like I've never had clear signs. So I woke up on the Saturday morning, and my birth keeper had texted me and said, oh, just checking in. And I was like, yep, just got like this cramping that I've had for the last month. There's no change, no different sensations. And I was painting with my toddler. And about 10 minutes after sending that message, I started going, oh, these like sensations, or these cramps are like a bit more pronounced now. And my toddler had like paint all over her. She was painting my dogs. She was really getting on my nerves. And I was like, this is weird. I feel like irritated. And then I was like, oh, and like, I don't feel good. I feel crampy. And I was like, oh. And I started like maybe putting two and two together that I think I was probably in denial because of how long my first labor was. I didn't want to like ever be like, I'm in labor, and then it dragging out. So I was probably in denial that morning. But looking back at my messages with my birth keeper, it was hilarious because like at 10-minute intervals, I would send her a message being like, actually, oh, and then I was like, no, I'm definitely in early labor. And then I was like, yep. I'm like feeling like I need to get my TENS machine on. And then she called me and she's like, do you want me to come over? So pretty much they just kept increasing and getting more consistent. And I made like a big batch of labor aid. Because I had a toddler, I couldn't set up my birth space until like the last hurrah. So I started like getting my husband to put the pool up. And by about 1 p.m., I was like feeling like I needed to like bounce on the ball and get my TENS machine on, and I just like rested. I was at home watching a movie with my daughter, and I was really like tuned out to her. Like I wasn't noticing, like I think my husband was noticing she was like jumping on me, and she was like climbing up on the furniture and jumping and front flipping into the birth pool that was empty. And I think he was getting like cautious that he didn't want to like interrupt my space, but I was so tuned out. Like I was just, like riding through each contraction on my ball, and I put the TENS machine on, and he was like, oh, I'm going to take her out to the park. And I was like, okay, cool. So he left, and like as soon as he left, I was like, oh, I need to like yeah, I need to move. I need to go outside. And I went outside on my birth ball and just had my headphones in. And oh my God, it was so good. Just like that laboring on your own again. I loved it. And I found this time I was so in tune to the experience. So I would get a contraction and just fully move through the song I was listening to and just like moving my body in like the weirdest ways, but it felt incredible. Felt really, really good. And I was like obviously keeping in touch with my husband and my birth keeper, and I was shocked at how quick things were progressing. So I was from that to feeling like I needed to get in water like really quick. And again, I would like stay in a spot until I felt like I needed different like scenery, and then I'd move again. And I ended up maybe like 2 hours after my husband left, I was like, I think I need to get in the shower, but I don't want to take the TENS machine off. I was like obsessed with this TENS machine. It was just getting me through. I had the L10s, which I didn't have in my first birth. I had a cheaper one and it didn't do anything. This one was incredible. Like I actually didn't want to get in the water because it was so good. And just before I got in the shower, I called my husband. It must have been my last logical thought. And I just gave him one sentence. And I just said, I need you home. I need you to call my brother to get Alaska picked up. And I need you to get ice. And he was like, okay. And like 15 minutes after he was home, my daughter had been picked up. My brother only lived around the corner. He was home, my daughter had been picked up, and I was on all fours in the shower and I was just like roaring. And
Wow.
I think he was like a bit shocked at how quickly I'd progressed. And I knew at this point with my body language that I was actually getting really close. And some work that I'd done with my birth keeper, which I think just made the biggest difference to this birth. I said that I didn't feel in control with my first birth. This time I knew the only way was like didn't outsource anything. So I knew the only way to get through was internally and with me, like by just doing it. And some work I'd done with my birth keeper is like meeting the intensity of birth each time, like not fearing it, like meeting it at the edge and then going out the other side as this rebirth person. And I experienced that 100%. And instead of looking back, I probably was in transition, but when I started getting those waves of like, whoa, this is full on and it's taking over my whole body, I was getting excited. I was like, yes, I'm doing it and I'm meeting it at the edge, and this means I'm about to meet my baby. And that mindset shift from like, oh, I'm about to get a contraction to I'm going to get a contraction and I'm going to meet it and I'm going to challenge it. Like that, I think played the biggest part in my experience. I never felt out of control in this birth. Like I felt, like I owned that experience. I really quickly, once my husband was home, was like, can you fill up the birth pool? I was feeling like I needed to get out of the shower. And again, I think like 2 minutes later, I was like, is it filled up? And he was like, no, I just put the hose in. And I was like, I'm just getting in. So I just got into like, it was just the pool with like 2 centimeters of water in it. And I just started I don't think I was bearing down at this point. No, I hadn't transitioned to that yet, but I was like, okay, I'm going to get my birth combs, and I had Banksia pods as well, which act as like the best acupressure points ever. So you do the same thing, you put them in the palm of your hands, and they were great. So I just really wrote out those last few contractions my birth keeper got there, and so beautiful. I don't actually remember, I remember her entering the space, but nobody said a word for like 20 minutes. I think that's really important for any birth workers. Like they don't need to make their presence known. And all she did was my husband was pouring cold water over my back with like icy face washes, and she just picked up one and started doing it. And they were both just doing it. And it wasn't until like 20 minutes after she arrived that I put my hand out and I said hello to her. But that whole time, no one said anything. It was so funny now that I look back. And she put her phone, I didn't even think to get my phone out, but she put her phone on video, like up on my daughter's play kitchen right in front of the birth pool, which I'm so grateful because she filmed it all.
Oh, that's
And
so nice.
yeah, right before I felt babe transition down to needing to push, I was just, every time I'd get a contraction, I'd say, I'm doing it and I'm going to meet them. And I was just yelling and I was laughing, and it was really surreal watching it back on video. And yeah, I suddenly just felt that change again, that change to needing to push and that like bowling ball feeling in your bum. And this time I didn't get the relief. Like the first time I felt like I could rest and I could lay down. This time I did not get that. It was like the intensity shot up another 100%. And I remember like going to lay down on the side of the pool because I'm like, I'm going to use this time to rest before the pushing stage. And my body was like, no, like fetal ejection reflex. And the only way I can explain it is like needing to do a full projectile vomit. I put my head on the side of the pool and my whole body just went like this. Like It was so funny. And I was like, oh, holy moly, this baby's coming. And I started like feeling down and I could feel their head. And there was no slowing it down. I just remember saying, like, I was sitting in the birth pool going, it's just a stretch. It's just a stretch. I'm going to soften and open because I could feel like my perineum, like feel the baby's head, and it just felt so intense. And baby's head popped out, and I've got a video, and I'm literally just sitting there laughing, going, baby's head's out, like their head's out. And I just sat in like a squatted sort of position in the water. And then in the video, I'm telling my husband and my birth keeper, I'm like, oh, they're just rotating. I can feel them now. And it was just like I said, that full control. I knew exactly what was happening. And then baby came out with the next contraction, no pushing, like just full flew out. And I pulled him straight up to my chest and he cried straight away. With my daughter, she didn't cry for ages. Like she was awake, but like she was just looking around where he come out crying. It was like a perfect color, went straight to my chest. And it was just like the most, I said the first time, like, it was like the best feeling ever. This time round was just like normal, boring. Like he was on my chest and I just had a baby and that was just normal. No one said anything. I was just looking at him and I was like touching his skin, and we all just sort of stood in the room, or they all just stood in the room, and yeah, it was just this normal, uneventful day. Yeah, that was my birth pretty much. I did stay in the pool a little bit longer, and I had a lot more labor aid, and my birth keeper brought me like an after bleed tincture. And yeah, that was really his birth from start to finish.
So when did you realize that he was a boy as well? Because you didn't have any scans, right?
No, yeah, just, I don't know. I think we just pulled him up and knew. I intuitively knew, like my daughter kept saying that he's a boy, like baby boy. And I kept saying like throughout the pregnancy, even in one of the videos, I say like his head's out. So yeah, I just think I knew, like I can't even remember now. Like I think I just put him up and just thought that was him and he was here.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And like you said, you just had this deep innate knowing as well, because you
Yeah.
were really trusting your instincts at that point. What a beautiful story. So how were you really feeling in that moment after his birth? I mean, I know you said it was a normal, uneventful thing, but like far out. You just did it.
Yeah, I felt really powerful. Like I think that's what I felt like. I just did it. Wow. And I think like one of the first things I said was, oh my God, that was so much better. Like that was so much better than my first one. Like I don't know why, just the quick birth. And I didn't feel scared, or like I just felt like I had it. I could do it the whole time. I remember like my husband, like one of the first things he said was, wow, you're going to look back at that video and think that was so easy. And I was like, well, it wasn't easy, but they just like were shaking their head. They were like, wow, they thought that was really incredible to experience. It was just a polar opposite experience. Both my births were so different.
Oh, wow. And so then let's talk about the birth of your placenta. So how did that unfold?
So I had done work with my birth keeper around my placenta. Like I talked her through my first birth and like the process of the placenta that time. And she was like, all right, so we're going to do some work around like visualizing your placenta like detaching, and so that process is really good for you, and that's literally what happened. So I went and moved to the lounge and I started breastfeeding, and I was like, oh, I think I need to do a poo. And I think she just knew, like she was like, So she helped me to the toilet and she brought like my placenta bowl, and like just as I went to sit on the toilet, this is probably like 15 minutes after I gave birth, it just plopped out like efforts, like didn't
Wow.
take any effort, it just came. And I was like, oh thank gosh. Like I didn't have to poo, it was just the placenta coming. But I just was like, oh, I'm so glad it wasn't this like process where I had to put effort into it. It just came out. And I was willing to wait as long as I needed for the placenta as well, whether it be like an hour to however many hours. I was happy to wait that. But yeah, it was really quick. It was pretty much, just after I started breastfeeding him that it just, detached and came away, and it was fully intact as well. There was no retained bits or anything like that.
Oh, amazing. And so when it came to, because you just mentioned there that there was no retained parts and it was all intact, had you done some work in pregnancy about what a placenta is supposed to look like, or is that something that the doula was able to help you with?
Yeah, so I had, and doulas and birth keepers, they don't have any medical responsibility or anything like that. But my birth keeper, her business, she actually does placenta encapsulation, and she's like passionate about placentas. So she was really happy to do that for me. And like she was, it was really cool. She like got the placenta out and she was showing us all the different bits and the functions of it and like the sac. And it was really awesome to watch that. But yeah, she checked it over and there was, it looked all intact and she wasn't concerned about anything. And then we've kept it because we're going to plant it. In my culture, like it's a common practice to bury your placentas. And really the like theory behind it is that it keeps our babies grounded to the land that they're born on. So I thought that was really beautiful to do this time. And I'm an avid gardener now. So I've got a few citrus trees and an avocado tree I want to plant. So I'm going to do that, at some point in time. So he'll always be grounded I'm on a Wabiyakal country. So he'll always be grounded here.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I love that. And just to backtrack a little bit, and I don't think I asked you this after the birth of your daughter, but did you experience any tearing or bleeding after both your births?
Yeah, so first time round, no bleeding whatsoever. My daughter was 3.6 kilos at 43 weeks, so she was actually quite normal. Like she wasn't a big baby or anything. But my recovery, I did have a second degree tear, which I have always had this really big fear of medical stuff like needles. I go to the dentist and don't get the the numbing needle. Like I can't do needles or anything like that. So I opted to let it heal naturally, which it healed beautifully. And second time around, he was 4.5 kilos. He was a really big boy, and I had
Whoa.
just like that full, I actually felt like my sacrum was like snapping in half when he was coming out. I can't explain how intense it was, but second time round, I didn't have any pain. So like with Alaska, I felt like vagina pain, like so heavy for weeks. I didn't have anything with him. I didn't have burning when I weed or anything. And about 2 days after birth, I was like, oh, I should probably like check that, make sure I don't have any tears. And I remember looking and I was like, And I was looking and I was like, I think I got a tear. And then every time I looked more and more, I was like, oh, I don't know. Like I just felt like it was something I didn't feel like it was something I could manage at home. So I had to sit with that anxiety. It was a really difficult process that over the last 6 weeks I've integrated, but I sat with it that night. And I remember talking to my friend who's a midwife, and she was saying, like, with tears, you need to get them seen like no longer than 48 hours. So I sat with, like, do I go to hospital and get it assessed? And then I was thinking it was probably like a 2nd or 3rd degree. And I was just hoping I could just go get it assessed and then know what to do. I didn't ever want to have like a potential 3rd degree and not do anything about it and then have issues later on. So I decided to go up to the hospital. I called the maternity unit and I explained my situation, which I had to explain like 100 times. And I just kept Bub in the car with my husband. It was late at night, so he just drove around and they just slept the whole time. And it was a really interesting perspective because I've never been in a maternity unit. And what I seen on that night was like really eye-opening, like just from going in and sitting in the waiting room to 2 women in the waiting room fully like bearing down in front of me, not having a room to go into. I was like, whoa, is this like what happens? Like, I was really shocked. And it was really busy. So I spoke to like 4 different midwives, 2 OBs, and eventually someone could come and assess me, and it was a midwife. And she said, oh, you have like a really, really clean tear. It's quite a big tear, but it's really clean. It's probably just a 2nd degree and we wouldn't suture it. So then I was like ready to go. And an OB come in and was like, no, I need to assess you. And they were just like, no, you've got a 3rd degree. You need to go straight into theatre. And at that point, I was just like, I felt physically sick. I just remember like wanting to vomit. I just felt so uneasy. And before I could ask anything, they both got run to an emergency. And that just kept happening. Like anytime someone would come into the room, they were like, sorry, we're just being called out. And at one point, the OB actually said to me, I'm so sorry, this is the care you're receiving. But long story short, in that time, I had a list of questions. I did all the research I could, and I said, I just want to get sutured in delivery suite. I'm happy with my decision. I don't want to go for the surgery. And their attitude just changed. And I was told, like, you will be incontinent for the rest of your life. You won't be able to have sex normally. You won't be able to have a baby vaginally, all this stuff. And I was like, oh, can you show me the statistics of that? And what I was finding was a lot of the women that had had the surgery actually have those issues anyway. The success rate from the data I was seeing wasn't actually that great. And then I was asking questions like, well, if that is to happen to me, like, can I not just come back and get the surgery at a better time? Like, I'm feeling fine now. And they were like, yeah, but it wouldn't be through us. You'll probably have to go private and pay. Like, it was just this big, like, scare tactic. And, yeah, so I got sutured. It healed beautifully. I don't have any issues whatsoever. I just went to a pelvic floor physio and like all my strength, and that's perfect. So I'm super happy with that decision. But it was my first little like experience into OBs, and yeah, how women can really be put in a hard position. So yeah, I'm really proud of myself, and I suppose for any woman that has to access medical care, like that doesn't take away from your birth. And isn't it amazing that we can utilize a medical system when it's really needed? Like we've got that available to us. So yeah, it's something I've had to process, I suppose, over the last few weeks, but healing, and that's actually been fine. So yeah, that was really, my story.
Wow, I'm so glad that I asked that question because there's just so many layers to it. And
Yes.
like you said, how amazing is it that we have it when we truly, truly need it?
Yeah.
And it's too much to go into in this episode. But in your situation, like you said, it doesn't take away from your birth. And you did it. Your body did it. You trusted in yourself and your baby. Well, like you said, you would seek out the medical care if you needed it. And in this situation, you did. And you utilized the resources that you had available to you while still making informed decisions, because you still did your own research. You still asked questions. And you still stood firm in your decision at the end of the day, and it worked for you. And the issue around all of this is the coercion that you received when you were in the hospital. and the almost like threats, like if you don't do what we tell you to do, this is what's going to happen. It's quite threatening
Yeah.
language.
I didn't mention, sorry, one bit I didn't mention is I was just like, well, I just want to get sutured here. And the response was, you'll have to sign that you're going against medical advice. And I was like, I'm happy to do that. But yeah, it is at the end of the day, like they say the worst case scenarios and just fire that at you. Like there's not a very broad range of like, here's option 1 and here's option 2. And this is the risk and the benefits. They just expect women, most women aren't going to go and look at the risks and benefits of each. They're going to just agree or go along with what the provider's saying because that's who's been to university and that's who they think knows best. Which in most cases you'd hope like that's what the situation is. But yeah.
But also, like, as a woman that's just given birth, how much fight do you have left in you to then go up against all these people that have so much power and are making these threats or coercing you into these decisions? And like I said, I really want to preface this with not all medical providers are like this, but we are seeing a common trend and we're seeing a lot of birth trauma. And there needs to be a lot of improvement when it comes to language that medical providers use when caring for women, because
Yeah.
the lack of informed consent, the lack of bodily autonomy as the foundation of maternity care is really lacking.
I agree.
And the statistics on birth trauma show that.
Yeah.
Wow, what a story. There's just so much to unpack, and unfortunately, like, we're already nearing the end of this interview and I'd love to talk about it more, but we're just running out of time. But I do want to leave with that message of that it's great that we do have the medical services there when we need it, when we truly need it. It's fantastic. We are so privileged, but the language needs to change in a way that puts the woman and her full bodily autonomy as the foundation of maternity care, and true informed consent needs to be obtained.
Yeah.
So, looking back, what are some of the most cherished moments or aspects of your free birth experience?
Oh, I think actually, like, it's funny. The first time was like once I actually had the baby in my arms. This time was like being in that intensity of labor and just like killing it. Like just being like, I'm doing this and this is what I was born to do. But that moment of, yeah, just being like, I am doing this. I think that this time around was one of the most memorable experiences.
Oh, that's so nice. And did you do anything differently to prepare for postpartum this time around? Because you did mention it after the first time you didn't do anything to prepare. So let's talk about your postpartum experience.
Yeah, heaps. So about halfway through my pregnancy, I love cooking. And I was going, I wish I knew more people having babies that I could cook for. And then I was like, I wonder how many other women are like wanting to cook for new mums but don't know how like to do that. So I created a Facebook page called Newcastle Postpartum Village, and pretty much the process is like it's a pay it forward meal train group. So women can either post on there, birth workers can post meal train links on there, or women either contact me directly and I put the call out, and we have people in our community that donate meals and it gets dropped off to the new mum. So I had been really heavily involved in that space for probably 6 months, and which was amazing because I built heaps of connections in this community. And this time around, I was like, I'm going to have a meal train. So I sent out my meal train to some women that I'd met in the birth community and on that page, and we were just showered with love. We did not have to cook a meal for a month. And the great thing about meal train is that it's all calendared. So like you don't get all the meals in one day. We just had people non-interrupting, just dropping stuff to our door and sending us a message. The most beautiful things, like women like baking their own sourdough, and I just can't even explain it. Like the most beautiful, nourishing foods. I also had a voucher for an Ayurvedic meal company that does postpartum near me, and I did a week of their meals as well. So like really beautiful, nourishing foods, easy for digestion. And that just made, especially with my experience having to like go to the hospital and then I had to go back 2 days just to make sure it had gone, my stitches had gone together. I was spending a lot of time just away from being in my home, and I could just take a meal with me, like while I was waiting. I also had, before I gave birth, I was planning on doing like the 7-7-7 method, or some people do 5 days. But it's like 7 days in the bed, 7 days like around the bed, and like 7 days like in your home. And I was sort of forced to do that this time because I really had to slow down and let my body recover. And it was so good. The first week, apart from having to go to those appointments, I just laid in bed with Bub. I got up to go to the toilet or have a shower, and my meals would just be warmed up by my husband and he'd bring them in. And in that first week, the difference I noticed was like when it's just you and your baby and no interruptions, you're not out and about, you don't have visitors, you really get to know them, and like you get to know their cues, and feeding's so much easier, and like bonding is so much easier. So I experienced that, and then eventually I just slowly would like come out and play with my toddler, and then towards the end of the 3rd week, like I would go for drives with them, and then by the 4th week I was like venturing out of the house just slowly as well. And now we're back into it as normal. And it's been incredible, like the most incredible experience. And he is just like a dream baby, like so calm, so chilled out. You can just do anything with him. Like I wouldn't have been able to do a podcast with my first daughter. Like, yeah. So it's been a really cool postpartum experience.
Oh, I love that for you. And what a great community coming together for the meal train. I think that's amazing.
Yeah. So my advice to anyone is get a meal train link. Even people that I hadn't met were dropping off meals and like activities for my toddler.
Oh,
it was just so
amazing.
Cool. Yeah.
Oh, so good. I'm so inspired by our community sometimes. Like it's just awesome how we come together.
Yeah.
So we do need to wrap things up, and I'm so sad about it because I could talk to you about birth all day. Let's wrap things up with, what advice do you have for other mothers considering a home birth or free birth based on your journey, or advice in general?
I think advice in general would be to align your care provider or your choices to what you want. Like, what's your dream birth? Like, if you're looking for a physiological birth, often you hear women that go through the private system, and like, I'd love to say that's the best place for them, but statistically it's not. So think of your dream birth and do whatever it takes to get the provider that aligns with that the best. In free birth, I think, like I already mentioned, it's your journey. It's like not your friend's journey who's free birth, or, you know, someone you see on social media. If you feel like you want to get antenatal care through a midwife and free birth, do that. Like if you feel like you want to have all the scans, do that. You're at the center of your care. And yeah, don't be afraid to follow what your gut's telling you or follow what your baby's telling you, because ultimately that's your journey.
Oh, such great advice. I love it. Love it, love it, love it. And like I said, I could talk to you all day about this. I just want to thank you so much, Mel, for coming on the show. I have loved this episode so much, and I'm really excited to get it out to the listeners. It's amazing. Yeah, really great. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on and listening to my story.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Mama Village podcast. Check out the show notes for a link to the Mama Village Instagram page, where I upload pregnancy, birth, postpartum and motherhood resources. Please let me know what you think of today's show and what you would like to hear from the podcast by leaving a rating and review. If you like the show, please subscribe and leave a review on your podcast platform. If you would like to share your positive pregnancy, birth, postpartum and motherhood story, or if you have education in the space to share, please send me a direct message on Instagram or email the.mamavillage@outlook.com. For all my listeners out there, thank you for your continuing support, and I will speak to you all in next week's episode.